Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavazden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy. Mark is out today, so I'm flying solo on this episode. So welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans, or one for the moment, and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this Amazing Friends episode of the Amazing Spider Talk. If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. Those reviews are important as they are our best way to spread the word about the show and indicate the size of our audience to potential guests and collaborators. This podcast exists because of the support of our amazing Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going because you love it so much, go to amazingspidertalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. Today on the show, I'm going to be talking to friend of the show and writer Alex Segura. We talked last year about his Aranya and Spider-Man 2099 Dark Tomorrow novel. But since that time, he was chosen to lead up the latest Spider-Verse story for Marvel Comics. That story, called Spider Society, began in the fourth volume of Edge of the Spider-Verse, which Segura also provided the connecting chapters for. Spider Society ended just a few weeks ago, so I thought it would be a good time to bring him back on the show to talk about the story and a more general discussion about his thoughts about how the Spider-Verse has impacted the mythos of Spider-Man. So let's get right to the interview.
Well, now let's meet one of our amazing spider friends, the kind of guy who go to other friends who recommend. Find out about the things they created. You'll love them so much that you wish you dated. But you're just friends, they're an amazing friend. A friend, a friend, a friend, they're an amazing friend.
All right, listeners, welcome back to the show. Joining me now is Alex Segura, who I last talked to, I guess, a little over a year ago now. We talked about your Aranya and Spider-Man 2099 Dark Tomorrow novel. But in the time since then, you've been up to, not only a lot of stuff in the realm of Spider-Man with kind of leading the Edge of Spider-Verse series and now your Spider Society miniseries. But you've got all these novels coming out. In fact, there was one I just learned about an hour ago from you. Talk about what's happened, I guess, for you in the past year and change since we talked, and how you balance all of this as a writer. Because honestly, of all your strengths, and you have many, the one that amazes me is just your ability to stay on so many projects.
Yeah, it's been busy. Yeah, that's the understatement of the year, I guess. After Aranya, Spidey 2099, Dark Tomorrow came out, that opened the door, I think, to do some actual Marvel Comics work in the Spider-Verse. And so that included a few short Aranya stories in Edge of Spider-Verse. And then Niccolo, the Spider Group editor, reached out and said, kind of set the stage for what was to become Spider Society. And the benefit there was that we had a few spaces to almost do the road to Spider Society, basically teeing up Miguel's search for the team, and then introduce some of the characters that were key players in the miniseries itself, like Gwen Goblin and Weapon 8 had already been introduced, but weaving Weapon 8 into the team and showing Aranya's desire to step into a leadership role. But yeah, since then also Alter Ego is coming out next month, which is a standalone sequel to Secret Identity, which won the LA Times Book Prize. I also wrote a prequel to Encanto, the Disney movie called Nightmares and Sueños, which also comes out December 3rd for Disney Books. And that's basically, I get to talk about Bruno, which is exciting. I get to talk about why he left and kind of what set up his desire to leave. And in addition to that, just lots of comics work, like Battle of Jakku for Marvel and Star Wars, which explores an area of Star Wars lore that I think has not been mined in great detail. That period between Return of the Jedi and right before Mandalorian is explored. That just what happened leading up to that final battle of the Galactic Civil War. And for DC, I'm doing The Question All Along the Watchtower with Kian Torme, which is about to come out in a couple of weeks. It comes out on November 20th. And that's part of DC's All In initiative, but also Renee Montoya trying to solve crimes on a space station is pretty cool, I think. So that's been fun to work on. And Dick Tracy's been chugging along at Mad Cave. That's me, Michael Moreci, and Geraldo Borges on art. So that's been going on. That's an ongoing, which is always a fun little rarity in comics these days, having an ongoing series.
Well, okay, so you listed them off, and again, stunning, but you didn't really
Yeah.
answer my question, which is like, how do you balance all of this? Because like, I could barely balance you just reading those off, you know, like,
Yeah, I guess the balance is just trying to keep these plates spinning. I'm working on the Daredevil novel now, which was it had been announced, but they showed the cover today on Marvel.com, which is fun. So it's really kind of keeping the plates spinning, and also I'm probably at my max, like at the max of what I can do, which is a lot. So kind of figuring out what needs to go or what needs to be pushed, and being a little more judicious when I seek out new things. Like I'm probably not knocking on doors as hard as I was this time last year,
yeah.
which is a blessing. It's a good thing. And and it's hard as a parent too. You have kids and family and other responsibilities, and just trying to find balance. And so, and the short answer is I don't do much else. Like I don't have a lot of other hobbies, but that's okay because my hobby and passion is my work. So that's the good part.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not anywhere near the like workload of you, you know, but like
But
I'm
you can
doing
relate. Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing this podcast. I got a 2-year-old, and I'm trying to get a book out the door, and just seeing you be so successful with it all,
You get
and
it.
like it's really stunning, and I
Thank
not
you.
to like
I
blow
appreciate
hot
it.
air your direction,
No,
but
yeah,
I'm
it's good.
I'm impressed because I feel like every time I turn around, you're announcing something new, and I think that's really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, just trying to keep it interesting for myself, and seizing the opportunities as they show up, which is, this is a dream. Like I think we talked about this last time, but being able to go back in time and being like, hey, you're going to write this novel about Miguel O'Hara, who was such an eye-opening moment for me in terms of just identification. And just I love what Peter David and Rick Leonardi did with that character and the inversion of the tropes. And really, that was kind of the first foot in the door into the greater Spider-Verse, like these alternate Spider-Mans, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. But yeah, I'm just trying to enjoy the ride, and also be aware that this stuff is fleeting, and still do my own creator-owned stuff where I can, and just be professional and have a good time doing it.
Awesome. Well, speaking of alternate spider people,
Hmm.
I'm going to be honest because, I have run the Spider-Man community, and we have an active kind of like forum group, the Slack, and,
Yeah.
there's probably more places that are more tapped into, like what people think about Spider-Man than around my show, but it is a pretty like distilled, hardcore group of people. And every time Marvel announces a new Spider-Verse story, there's like a kind of collective groan or like exhaustion from the people within my community. And, we just had End of the Spider-Verse last year, which in the titles kind of promised no more Spider-Verse in a way. And
Right.
and honestly, I felt the same. I was like, oh no. But then I saw that your name was on it, and I was like, okay, great. I'm going to read this. Like Alex
Okay.
is
Oh,
a
you mean Spider
friend.
Society?
Yeah, I mean, because it's a Spider Verse event, can we
Yeah.
admit? Yeah, and and I like your stuff, and I like you personally, so of course I was
Thanks.
going to read it. But you kind of even allude to this exhaustion in the opening of your story, where Miles and Gwen are kind of like bemoaning the Spider Verse. They're like, "Oh, it's Madam Web. What does she want now?" Like it's another adventure where the web of life and destiny is collapsing. But like, I still really enjoyed the story,
Thanks.
and I'm glad I picked it up because like you did sell me on it. But like, what do you say to someone like who maybe skipped this, or because they're having that kind of Spider-Verse exhaustion? Like, what would you tell them is like the hook to this that like might be like worth taking that trip again?
Yeah, I think it's really the hook is character based in that you're getting to see a lot of Spider-Verse heroes or spider heroes take the spotlight that would normally not get that opportunity. Like if I was to compare this to other superhero teams, this is less Spider Avengers and much more Spider X-Men. Like it's a ragtag group of spider heroes up against really insurmountable odds trying to save the Spider-Verse and trying to save their friends and save the universe at the same time. So it's very much a hard luck story about heroes that you normally don't see. Like Aranya, like when was the last time, like in recent memory, aside from the
Yeah.
stuff I've done, when was the last time she got a meaningful spotlight? So this is like a very rare opportunity to see her in a starring role. Like I think, and this isn't the fault of marketing or anything. I think when people saw the title being announced, they immediately thought, okay, it's going to be Spider-Man, it's going to be Ghost Spider, it's going to be Miles Morales, it's going to be, all these top A-list spider heroes, which is cool. And I mean, I would love to read that book at some point, but I definitely wanted to have it feel a little more on the fringe and spotlight heroes that really you get a lot of room to play with as a writer, like Web Weaver. Steve Fox did such a great job co-creating him, and it was really fun to play with that character for a while, and Spider Punk, and create new dynamics between these characters. So I think it's more about if you want a story about hard luck heroes that are really in the Spider-Verse, it's less of a big Spider-Verse quote unquote event, even though it has all the trappings of a major event, and much more a character piece about the definition of heroism and not underestimating yourself, which is the core, I think, arc that Aranya goes through. At first, she's very hesitant to lead the team. Then she kind of has no choice. Miguel is taken off the board very quickly, and the Sinister Squadron, who are the main antagonists in the story, don't have the same kind of, I guess, ceremony that supervillains usually have. They just they just went for their throat immediately. Like
Yeah.
that the big issue one battle I thought was one of the fun parts of writing for Scott and showing the Spider Society just getting completely whooped out of the gate, which was fun to see.
Yeah, well, I should say if that pitch hooked you, like go read it. We're going to get into spoilers very quickly here.
Yeah.
I'm sure the trade is going to come out in like a couple months, and it'll be available. I think it's already starting to become available on Marvel Unlimited if you
Yeah.
want to check it out there. So it gets my stamp of endorsement.
Thank you.
Like as someone who is Spider-Verse skeptical. And I agree with you. I think the approach it's funny you say X-Men because it even has that kind of teen romance, like sprinkled in there, to sweeten
Yeah, I
the
think what
sauce,
gets me excited is the character interplay. You have
Yeah.
like some stuff between Aranya and Spider-Punk. You have some friction between Weapon 8 and Web Weaver. There's some tension between Miguel and Anya for leadership of the team, and then the mystery of Jessica Drew, this alternate Jessica Drew coming in her first meaningful, like she's shown up in comics, but this is her first kind of long form appearance.
Sure.
And Spider-Cat. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah, you had me at the Spider Cat.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious. The end of the Spider-Verse story by Dan Slott, elevated Aranya into a spot where she was kind of like given a key role in the like realm of maintaining the web of life and destiny. And I was curious if you had anything to do with that, or he was teeing you up in some way. And that kind of breeds into like, how long has this been in the works? That those stories from, I guess, about a year ago,
Right.
Maybe like pave the road for you to take this path.
I didn't have anything to do with Dan's story. I'm obviously a fan and like his work and was excited to play off it a little bit. I think the first meaningful nudge I got to give was in one of those early Edge of Spider-Verse Aranya stories, particularly the one that Enid Balam drew, where she fights that the alternate Electro. That's what really got me thinking, and I think maybe Nick thinking about, okay, maybe there's a team here. Maybe there's something to be said about creating a team that protects the web of life and destiny and having Aranya be central to that. And obviously that Electro then comes and plays a part in Spider Society. And that was a much more organic trajectory for it. It wasn't really a big strategic idea, but I definitely was reading Dan's stuff and trying to pick up on it and honor it. You never want to be the guy that comes in and starts wrecking what everyone else has set up. So
Sure.
I tried to play within the sandbox I was given, but also, do what I think I'm good at, which is character stories that pop in these kind of bigger superhero epics.
Yeah, so you kind of kicked this whole thing off in March of this year in the Web of Spider-Man #1.
Yeah.
I guess you would call that book a digest of sorts. It's
Yeah, I mean it's all original stuff. So, but like a springboard,
Yeah, it was like here's the next year of Spider stories, kind of like parceled out, and yours was kind of the big like cliffhanger, I guess
Yeah.
for that. Like we've got this big Spider event, Spider-Verse event coming up, in the works. How much of this was formed at that point where you just been hired and kind of quickly turned that around, or were you well on your way through crafting the story at that point?
I think we were still pretty early days, like in terms of crafting Spider Society. We knew like the roster, we knew, I think, the overall story and that they were going to be up against the Sinister Squadron. And we knew what role Madam Web was going to play. So it was very much a table setting story in Web of Spider-Man #1 to look, once you throw out the term Spider Society, people's ears are going to perk up because
Yeah.
it's so tied to the idea of the movie and the kind of Spider-Verse mythos in the comics. So we wanted to do that out of the gate to get people jazzed and excited. And I really wanted to play with the dynamic of Madam Web and Spidey 2099 building this team and showing that it's something that's been happening in the background for a while. Except now Madam Web is like, it's time. Like we need to activate this cell of heroes and you need to start collecting these people. And I love the roster kind of fantasy footballing of like who would I pick and who would I
Yeah.
not pick, and that was fun to see just through Miguel's perspective and Webb's perspective. But then we immediately kind of throw a wrench into that with the next story.
About those individual characters on the team, like all these Spider-Verse events, they have a prelude of Edge of Spider-Verse series, the
Yeah.
first one being so famous for introducing like, Penny Parker and Gwen Stacy, or Spider-Gwen rather. And like all these characters that have like gone on to be in movies and I think
Yeah.
it's created this sort of like a speculator collector's market for the Edge of books because you're guaranteed to get a few new Spider people,
Yeah.
and they form the backbone of the team that we follow in Spider Society. So I guess I'm curious, like, did you have any involvement in the kind of like crafting of these individual stories, considering the role that they would play in your story? Or was it kind of like, hey, this is the separate anthology stories that we're going to do. We'd love it if you would include X, Y, and Z in your Spider Society story.
Yeah, no, I didn't have any influence on what other people were writing. It was more like in conversation with Nick and Caden in the Spider office about like the roster. And I gave my first pass, like I think these are the people I'd like to use, and then we had a back and forth, like very great brainstorming of like characters that we wanted to use. And Weapon 8 was a great suggestion.
Yeah,
I
that
wanted to
character
use
pops immediately. Like
Yeah,
that,
yeah, he's just
that
like a
story
great
is really strong. Yeah.
Yeah, he's just a wonderful character to use. Web Weaver, I knew I wanted to be a part of it, and we knew we wanted Miles and Ghost Spider to be in it to some degree, but we wanted it to feel a lot more like these heroes are up against the ropes, and the team that they're battling has already taken out like the quote unquote elite Spider
Yeah.
heroes, like Spider-Man himself, like Peter Parker. Very intentionally doesn't show up until the end. And it comes up in the series. They're like, where the hell is Spider-Man? Like, where is the Spider-Man? And so I wanted that to happen because it creates a sense of doom and danger. And then you're like, okay, we're going to have Aranya and Spider-Punk and Web Weaver. Like, these are the heroes that are going to save the universe. Like, how is that going to happen? And so that was intentional, and hopefully we pulled it off.
I think you did. I really appreciated the sidelining of Peter Parker, despite my obvious love of that character.
Yeah, I love the character.
But even Dan Slott's end of the Spider-Verse concludes with him kind of being ushered out and said, like, this is not your thing to deal with anymore. And so to see him come back and be like leading another like attack, I think would have kind of like cheapened that kind of exit for him. And so
Yeah.
I liked your approach of like, who are the other people in the Spider-Verse that we could enjoy following.
Good.
On that note, like, again, some of these anthology stories in the Edge of Spider-Verse have gone on to have a life of their own, and others, for whatever reason, like, there's that one from the first one where there's just a cannibal spider person that's eating
Yeah.
people. I don't expect that guy. Maybe they'll like Sony will decide to remake The Fly and make it The Spider or something like that.
Anything's possible, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like they're going to mine the IP as much as they can. But what do you think makes for like an excellent alternative Spider person from these anthology stories? Like what do you think defines one that makes a big splash versus one that doesn't?
That's a great question. I think a good example is Ghost Spider, Spider Gwen, and I think the character has to adhere to the bigger ethos of Spider-Man, which is like a hero down on his luck that has to struggle to do the right thing, and also has a lot of personal weight and tragedy in their backstory. And by personal weight, I mean the best Spider-Man stories aren't because he fought Doc Ock. It's because he fought Doc Ock to get medicine for his Aunt May,
Of
who's
course,
dying.
yeah.
It's got to have that personal undertone, and it also can't seem easy. So it can't feel like no diss on Batman. I love Batman, but it can't seem like the hero has everything at their fingertips in terms of gadgets and money and resources. Like it has to feel like a struggle, which is why I was telling you it's more of an X-Men type team than an Avengers type team. Even though Spider-Man has been an Avenger, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so you've got that built-in familiarity. Like with Gwen, it's Gwen Stacy, an iconic supporting cast member in the Spider-Man mythos, but now tweaked in a way that makes her feel fresh and different. So you need that familiarity, whether it's supporting cast member reimagined or Peter Parker reimagined or a different character in the spider suit reimagined. But you also need to have that conflict and struggle. Like this person is really putting their life on the line to do the right thing because inherently they feel like this is the right thing to do to be a hero, and I will sacrifice. And then also having the duality of the identity. Like I think one of the coolest things about Peter Parker is anybody could find out that he's Spider-Man at any moment, and that would uproot his life to the nth degree. And I think that's kind of ebbed and flowed. Like, obviously there was a time when his identity was public, and then there's been times when he's told everyone he can that he's Spider-Man. But I think those are the root elements to a really good spider hero.
Great. You've been doing these kind of like one shots and like various backups and things for Marvel for a while now. What was it like? What was different about how you worked with them in regards to you getting your first miniseries with them in the form of like Spider Society? Like, do they hand you the keys to the castle and say, okay, now you're in the elite society, or the Spider Society, if you will? What changes about the process when you get something like a miniseries when you're working with Marvel?
Well, I think, I would like to think that I had done some time and proven myself as reliable in terms of turning stuff in on time, but also
Sure.
turning stuff in that's easy, manageable and effective and successful. And so I was not an unknown commodity. Like they knew, okay, Alex can meet a deadline. Alex can string some words together. And so it felt to me like a natural progression to level up from doing these one-offs or one shots. I did a Star Wars one shot, and have done a few things for other offices and some Infinity Comics. So I think maybe as a whole, they thought, okay, he's ready for this next level. And I think the difference with that is you have to zoom out and give a longer view of what your plan is. Not just say, hey, this is my roster, I'll turn in the 4 scripts tomorrow.
Yeah.
But like, this is where I see the story going. This is what I see the Sinister Squadron doing. This is the villain, but then this is the big bad. I think one of the cool sleight of hands we did was making people think that Gwen Goblin was the villain. And in many ways, she's kind of the hero. By the end of the story, you get to see a meaningful arc for her, which I was thankful for. Obviously, I wrote it, so it was part of my plan. Was I wanted to, without spoiling too much, is I wanted to give her a redemptive arc and a realization that maybe she'd been manipulated. And then the twist of like who this evil Madam Web is, and
Yeah, we're in spoilers, so go for it.
yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean I'd always, as a kid, I always thought that it was so weird that Madam Web looked just like Aunt May. Like she just, especially the way John Romita Jr. drew her, it just looked like Aunt May wearing this mask. And I messaged Nick and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if this was like an evil Aunt May? And then it's like once he okayed that, it was like, well, what's the story there? What is the actual organic story there besides being like Aunt May is bad, like she's evil, like there has to be a thread where Aunt May is traumatized by something that it leads her down this path to being manipulated by Norman Osborn. And then what is the same trajectory for Gwen? Like what happens to her that radicalizes her and makes her want to take the Goblin Serum and become this villain? And then how do you weave those two characters together? That was part of the fun, but all that has to be shown on paper before I went to script. So I had to really kind of show the Spider office what my big beats were and what the outline was, and then go from there. So to answer your question, you have to show your work a lot more because you're doing a lot, you have a lot more real estate to play
Sure.
with, as opposed to like an 8 to 10 page story where, I can send an email and say, this is the story, Aranya's here, then she does this, and then we end here. And you can add the dressing as you write. For Spider Society, we had to really like brainstorm the big arc and how it would play a lot on the front end.
Cool. I have a lot of questions about the Aunt May reveal
Okay,
and
good.
the Gwen Goblin. Is that the in-house term for her, Gwen Goblin?
Oh, I mean, that's just how I refer to her and how I name her in the
Well, then
script. Because
that's
she does,
it. Then that's it.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
she's Green Goblin, like in the same way that Spider Gwen, like she can't call herself Spider Gwen,
Yeah.
she's Ghost Spider, but everyone refers to her as Spider Gwen. So in my shorthand, I always called her Gwen Goblin, and I think at
I
the
just want to
end,
be clear that I'm not calling her like Green Stacy or something.
no, no, no,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
okay,
no, I
all
mean,
right.
she's Green Goblin of her universe, but
Yeah.
in my brain, she's always Gwen Goblin.
Okay, good. I just wanted to get the nomenclature right. That's really
Totally.
important to me,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Alex. Yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So you have this team of characters that are the heart of your story. Weapon 8, Aranya, Webweaver, the new Spider Woman, if you will, Hunter Spider, Spider Punk, Spider Cat, Night Spider. Miguel is there for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like, what were the ones that you kind of fought for being included in the story of those that were most important to you? I mean, obviously you have an affinity for Miguel and Aranya.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I fought for them. I think it wasn't combative in any way. It was much more like a back and forth.
Sure.
Definitely, I wanted to play with Aranya and Spidey 2099 because those are my favorite Spider heroes, and I think they're a little. I would love to see more of them, whether it's me writing or somebody else. But just I love those characters. I really liked Night Spider. She wasn't really a member per se, but I liked weaving her into the story because I think she's got a great
Yeah.
costume and. We are in spoiler territory, so I wanted there to be a traitor out of the gate. And so I think it was cool where people saw the promo images and were like, oh, Hunter Spider, that's neat that he's there. And then to have the rug pulled out from under them. Not that there
Yeah.
was like a massive Hunter Spider fan base, but I like the character. I'm a huge fan of J.M. DeMatteis's work in the Spider-Verse and beyond. Like his Spectacular Spider-Man run to me is one of my favorite Spider runs ever. And so you see little nods to that, like Ashley Kafka shows up for a second,
Sure.
and there's a vermin cameo, but
In the
um,
only universe where Ravencroft is a functional
yeah, yeah,
mental institution.
it
Yeah.
actually works. It actually works in Webweaver's world. So yeah, Aranya, Miguel, trying to think who else. I really was happy to use Webweaver. I think that was someone I wanted to play with, and Madam Web. I think obviously Madam Web was going to be there either way, but the level with which we got to use her, I definitely wanted to have a say in that. And yeah, Weapon 8 was a suggestion. Nick thought that he would be a good fit, and it did work in with the bigger idea of this more like a rebel team. And when the opportunity arose to use this new Jessica Drew, I jumped at it because I mean, how could you not? Like, I love Spider Woman. I love the original Jessica Drew a ton, but using an alternative version that is recognizable to people that have seen the movie was just felt like a meaningful opportunity to bring them in, especially if you're coming to this book from the film.
In my head canon, there's a Spidey Super Stories issue that has a Spider Woman in it. That's a black woman. That looks a lot like that character. And so like my head canon is that she's the one from the Spidey Super Stories comics that
Oh,
has
cool.
like
Yeah.
found its way. That's just my head canon.
Whatever works. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what's interesting about like this kind of X-Men approach is like, you've got like loners on the team of X-Men, you got your Wolverines and so on, but like this is a team comprised of characters that are kind of all loners in
Yeah.
a way, like, so how do you write that differently? Is it more combative? Like, is that something you kind of factor into your approach?
Yeah, I think there's members of the group who are more conducive to playing with others. Like Web Weaver is more of a seasoned pro, and he gets it. Sometimes you have to team up with people to
Sure.
fight the bigger bad. And Spider Punk seems to get it. This is not her first rodeo. Spider-Man 2099 is the de facto leader of the team. But then you have outliers like Weapon 8, who has literally just come onto the scene and is trying to figure out who he is and what his place is. And so he builds an immediate bond with Aranya because she's the one that pulls him in, and he uses her as kind of his anchor. So there's a little bit of a soft triangle between Aranya, Weapon 8, and Spider-Punk in terms of like, not just in a Betty Archie Veronica way, but more an emotional connection. Like, Weapon 8 feels a bond towards Aranya and has some friction with Spider-Punk because there's a literal bond between them that we see evolve in the story. And Web Weaver is kind of like the voice of reason, like, hey, let's just do the job. And Spider-Cat is obviously comic relief, but also I wanted to give the cat, some moments of actual plot importance, not just being there to meow and be pet.
Yeah, he takes down all the supervillains.
Yeah. He does a great job. He literally like stops the Sinister Squadron at one point in issue 2 just by meowing really loud. I thought that was funny, but also effective. And I also wanted to do a little bit of an ego check with Miguel, who, is super smart, super capable, but not always right. And I wanted him to kind of be the victim a little bit and give Aranya a pedestal to step in and be the leader and realize the challenges that come with leadership. Like she doesn't have a ton of experience running a team. And so she has to use her instinct, but then also kind of use what she's learned from Miguel. And in my headcanon, the novel weaves into that. I know, realistically, the novel isn't in 616 continuity, but in my head and heart, that happened at some point.
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
We covered it on Amazing Spider Talk, so therefore it counts.
It's canonical,
That's officially how these things work.
Yeah.
If my ego has anything to say about it.
Yeah, I support that.
Which, of course.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it? I love you talking about all these balancings of these different moments, and I know this isn't the most ambitious, interweaving of like characters that you've done. It's a 4-issue comic series versus novels
right.
and sequels to novels and things like that, but like, how do you personally kind of like chart these kind of journeys for these characters when you are crafting these to find the right moment for each character to kind of like get a moment or step forward? Do you plan it out, like with notes or whatever, and say like, this person needs a moment. It's been 10 pages. Like, what's your kind of like, is it instinct at this point?
It's a little bit of both. I think there is some instinct involved. Like if I go a few pages, I'm like, well, I haven't really even mentioned Jessica Drew, or, Spider-Punk hasn't had a line in a few pages. Like you try to remedy that and give balance, but on a bigger level, a bigger scale, I wanted each character to feel like they had a reason or moment. The subplot for Jessica Drew was she's the secret weapon. Like Miguel and Madam Web brought her on the team for very specific reasons. And one of those reasons is she can't really be tracked by quote unquote Madam Web, like evil Madam Web.
I have a question about that. Is there a reason why she can't be tracked?
There is. It's just her universe doesn't fall into what that Madam Web can see, quote unquote, and has some kind of disruptive ability that she,
okay.
We kind of explain it a little bit in the story, but for whatever reason, she's not on Madam Web's radar, whether good or bad. And we see early on that this evil Madam Web is disrupting our Madam Web's ability. So, there's a lot of kind of static going on that seems to surround Jessica Drew. But my point being is that was the thread we wanted to give to her.
Sure.
She's like the seasoned veteran who has just never played on this team before. The big free agent signing that comes in is like going to change the dynamic of the team. And I think had Miguel not been taken off the board so quickly, she would have been the number 2 person kind of advising Miguel. But things get thrown into disarray leading up to the series. So when we start out, Aranya has to kind of pull the pieces together. But yeah, what I really try to do is I try to give each character a story. And, Weapon 8's story is, I'm a loner, I don't want to be a part of this, to by the end of it, he is very much a part of it and feels really proud to be a part of the team. Web Weaver is like the seasoned veteran, who's kind of annoyed by a lot of these like inexperienced players, like especially Weapon 8, to a lesser degree Spider-Punk, but by the end of it, they have a camaraderie that I think is really warm. The Web Weaver Weapon 8 stuff is really heartwarming to me because it's two characters that shouldn't get along, that by the end of it are like not best pals, but have a grudging respect for each other. I'm trying to think.
It's the classic Wolverine Cyclops
exactly.
dynamic.
Yeah. And for Aranya, it's this she starts from a place of great self-doubt to, by the end of it, she has she willingly sacrifices herself to save the universe. and it can't be taken away because she survives. Like she was willing to obliterate
Right.
herself and like sticks her hands into that matrix and to sacrifice herself to save the web of life and destiny. And I think there's a lot of real estate that she covers in that series. And for Miguel, like it was just a humbling moment for him. You know, he did some good and he helped, but he wasn't the star, and that's okay. And for Madam Web, it was like, how do I grapple with being a hero when my key reason for being is gone? Like I can't see the future. Like what do I do? So she relies on the skills that she's honed, you know, as a spy and an agent, you know, as you know, kind of espionage. A lot of this is kind of unsaid between the panels because there's just not
Sure.
real estate to show it. But you know, you see where they started and where they end, and there's an arc there for each of them.
I think it really lands, and I reread all the issues today, so
Oh,
like I got
thanks.
to
Yeah, I
see
appreciate that.
the arcs kind of compressed, and so you can
Yeah.
really see that stuff come out. And the reason I ask about it is because I do find it like I tend to like solo books, you know, with a solo hero, and because I find a lot of like team books end up kind of forgetting about members of the team, or they're there in a perfunctory way. Like, as much as I loved Spider-Man on the New Avengers, he was kind of always just the butt of the joke, and
Yeah.
there to like make a joke about, are we getting paid for this, or how much people were annoyed with his banter. And it was like,
Yeah.
you know, I want a little bit more out of that character, but I did really appreciate like the care you put into giving all of these characters something to do in a meaningful
Thank
way,
you.
and journeys to go on.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, you see it with Avengers, like especially when half the team has their own solo series, you're not going to see a lot of character development in the team book. So the Hawkeyes and the Wondermans and the Visions of the team get more development, like more change for them happens in the pages of that book. And I kind of wanted to turn the knob a little bit towards that and have only characters that really could be effective because they didn't
Sure.
have, you know, Spider-Punk has a series, Webweaver has had solo moments, and obviously I was talking to Stephanie Phillips at New York Comic Con, and I said, you know, thanks for, you know, I read her stuff, her Ghost Spider stuff to kind of just know what she was doing. I didn't want to step on any toes when there was like a book moving in its own direction, like Spider-Punk series ended right before Spider Society, so I was able to kind of see what the threads were, and I tried to liaison with that editorial office to make sure we weren't doing anything unexpected and anything that felt weird or not the desires of the character. So, but my point being is that I wanted a lot of characters that I would have the ability to push and change, or at least give the idea of change in those pages.
I'm really enjoying Stephanie's Spider-Gwen
Yeah,
series.
yeah.
Again, a skeptic because I like her in Earth 65, you know,
Mhm.
and I'm dubious of all these characters joining the 616, but she leans into that, and I think it's really made it something special.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, speaking of, like, let's talk about your book, because that's what we're here to talk about. Spider Society. It's in the
Yeah.
name, you know, like, I think by the end, the Spider Society is kind of the friends we made along the way. You know, you do establish this, like, hub for them at the beginning before it's completely destroyed.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I'm curious about that kind of space because it's like kind of a translation from the movies to the comic. You know, the sort of like, even the way it's drawn is very, you know, how we're introduced to the Spider Society and across the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
I guess I like, this is just lore nerd me like talking here. Is that Loom world in your mind? Like where does this kind of hub for spiders exist for these people? Because we never really seen something like that before. The movie kind of introduced it. You know, has the Sims building kind of officially replaced Loom world as the hub of spider people in the Marvel universe in your mind?
I wouldn't say it has replaced it. I would say for the purposes of this story, that is where they all converge because they've gotten this alarm from Madam Web, and we definitely wanted to, you know, evoke the film in terms of familiarity. Like you read that intro to Spider Society 1, and it feels very much like the movie, which is by design. Like you want
Yeah.
to make it as welcoming to new readers as possible. I didn't want people that read the book to feel like they needed to go elsewhere to kind of figure things out. Like you can read Spider Society #1 with no knowledge of
For
any
sure.
other Spider-Verse stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that was by design and I think it worked. I think one big secret weapon to the whole thing is Scott Godlewski, whose art on the series, on the majority of the series, just has a very open action, active feel, but his expressions and character stuff is so spot on. Like I would work with Scott again in an instant. Like he just is. It's really hard to find an artist that can balance action and intensity, but also do expressions really well. And he does. Like he gives each spider hero their own kind of personality just based on how he draws their faces. He draws a great on Anya, and it was why I often wanted Gwen Goblin to not be wearing her mask because his expressions were so good. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, I wouldn't say this is the definitive new hub for the Spider Society. I think for the purposes of the story, I wanted it to be a place that was iconic and recognizable, but also to give that feeling of that timeless feeling of the films, without having to over-explain anything, without having to do too many long caption boxes saying what happened. And I don't think we have a single, maybe one or two editorial notes in the whole series. Like I wanted
Yeah.
it to work on its own. Like you could read it, and once you were done with it, if you wanted to continue reading Spider Society or Spider Verse stuff, you could. But I wanted it to feel very much of its own.
Well, it gets destroyed almost immediately
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah. It
So
doesn't really matter right out of the gate. So
I guess that's why I was curious. We don't spend a lot of time in it, like when it's functioning,
yeah.
So I was like, is this is this like the double O? Like, is this MI6? Is this like this is where like the seamstress is working and weaving the web?
No, it's very much like we wanted to pull the rug out from under you, like right
Yeah.
out of the gate. And I think that coupled with the Hunter Spider reveal, like the big feeling we wanted to give was don't expect the unexpected. Like expect to have some surprises. And I wanted to have a meaningful surprise with each issue. And I think Gwen Goblin had already been kind of revealed in one of the shorts leading up to it, but I thought that was also a nice kind of sample of what the series was going to be. And so we end with Hunter Spider being the twist, and then issue two ends with the team like completely decimated. Like, yeah, these spider heroes that didn't think they could do it, well, they couldn't do it. Like that, very
Yeah.
much the sense of like they failed. And then the romantic subplot in issue three or four, and then the reveal of Madam Web at some point. I wanted to sprinkle. I'm not doing it in the right order, but I wanted to sprinkle out like some twists and jaw drop moments because that's what keeps you on your toes and keeps you wanting to buy things. I
Sure.
think.
Well, yeah, and I would add on to that. You mentioned Scott Godlewski and his art, and you had a second artist, Ruari Coleman. I'm probably
Yeah.
butchering his name, but like their art is also a great reason to come back.
Yeah.
Like it is like I can't imagine. First of all, I would say like you're lucky to have gotten artists that could keep up with the amount you asked them to do. It is,
Yeah.
it is pages of dozens of characters doing all kinds of things, and it's always impressive to look at. And I particularly liked, I think, Ruari, the kind of emotional elements of the back half were really like sensitively handled.
Yeah.
Like the scene with them in their kind of jail cell. And the tenderness there, I thought was really nice. How do you balance the kind of like needs of the story with like what they can reasonably deliver when you've got a story that could say have 100 spider people on a page?
Yeah, I tried to be really mindful. Like it's very easy for me to type 1,000 Sinister Squadron members storm the Sims building and all the Spider Society fight back. So I tried to be really detailed with Scott and Rory and the artists on the book, which characters I wanted to show, and also like have some level of understanding and try to keep some of the camera angles more kinder to them than, we wanted it to feel widescreen, but we also wanted to have these intimate character moments as well. I think being thoughtful about your artists goes a long way, and I'd like to think Scott had a great time working on the book. We got to meet at Phoenix Fan Fusion right before the book came out, and so that was really neat. And he drew me a spider burger. I don't have it right next to me, but he's a great guy, and Rory's great, and it was you just try not to be difficult. You try to make it fun and exciting, but also with the understanding that wow, I'm asking him to draw 1,000 spider heroes in this panel. Maybe I should pull back on the next scene and just give and that's also narrative. Like you have these big epic scenes, and then you go quiet just to kind of have a gear shift. But the needs of the book were also, this is a big, almost crisis-like event, so we have to have those moments. So I think they went in with that knowledge. but we didn't call them the Sinister 600 for a reason. We called them the Sinister Squadron. Like, there's just only so much we can do to drive the artist crazy.
Well, about the Sinister Squadron, like typically when we get these Spider-Verse stories, the villains are like fairly homogenous. It's like, here's an army of Doc Ocks, or Shathra, is turning everybody into a bug, or the Inheritors are, for some reason, dressed as Renaissance characters, etc. But with the Sinister Squadron, you kind of got the idea, or you get to play with like the idea of like remixing villains from wherever you'd like in the Spider-Verse, including like a J. Jonah Jameson Hobgoblin, which was a particular favorite of mine.
Oh, I also want to give a shout to Andres Ginolé, who did some pages in Spider Society too. I was forgetting his name, but I just looked it up. So he did some great work in Spider Society too. Anyway, you were saying.
Okay. Like it's a lot of power to wield, like create all these villains from my mind, and you definitely like, maybe nobody can out trivia Dan Slott, but there are some like obscure stuff that you threw in here. What limitations did you set for yourself in regards to like who you could pull in? And maybe there were none. And I guess like what are some of your favorite additions, if not J. Jonah Hobgoblin?
Oh yeah, there were no real limitations. I mean, there was so much space to fill. Like we had the big motif I wanted to lean into for the Sinister Squadron was that this evil Madam Web had influenced the creation of these alt Spider-Man villains. And so that kind of ushered in pre-existing characters like the female Electro and Doc Ock, the trainer, Carolyn Trainer. Yeah. Doc Ock. But then it was all kind of do whatever you want. Like Hunter Spider kind of was grandfathered into that because he is an alternate take on Kraven the Hunter, so that would make sense. But then, a lot of it was just free reign. Like, what could we do that was fun? I think I threw in there are a few alternate Light Masters in there somewhere. There's my personal favorite is the Silvermane as Spider Slayer character, which you see a few times. There's also like a Cyber Rhino, who I thought was a lot of fun. But Jonah as Hobgoblin just felt like such a natural fit. Like, what if J. Jonah Jameson was a goblin? What if he was a hobgoblin? Like, having him fly around and speak in his Jonah-isms was a kick. And then just tweaking the iconography to have it be familiar, but also kind of trivia, like I'm sure you had a field day, like looking at these characters and being like, well, what is that? Like what? And it was fun.
I was pleased that you brought the Scryers back. I know you included them in your novel, and I was someone's holding a candle up for the Scryers still.
I love those characters. I was telling a friend, like, if I could write a novel where Judas Traveler is the big bad, like, why stop there? So I did give Traveler a little bit of a break because he didn't seem like a fit here, but there were just playing with the iconography of these classic supervillains, and not just, I didn't want to fall into the trap where it's like, oh, he's just like gender flipping every character. Like I wanted it to feel like these are meaningful mashups and put some thought into it. And the core characters of the Sinister Squadron, like the demonic Mysterio, Electro, Carolyn Trainer, that was really an effort to evoke the iconic original Sinister Six, but have it be like these alternate versions. And then the squadron aspect comes in, and then that was just like filling out lists. Like, I would throw out names to Scott and to say, okay, can you do like Calypso Kraven mashup, or can you do like, what if Silvermane was a Spider Slayer? I thought that was really neat and fun, and I'd have to go through my notes again, but it was really like just pages and pages of different suggestions. And I said, take the ones you want, like use the ones you want that are visually cool, and go from there.
The first Hobgoblin that showed up looked like he was blonde, and I wasn't sure, but I was like, did he actually put Ned Leeds the Hobgoblin in here? Like Ned Leeds is actually the Hobgoblin.
Yeah, and then there is a universe where he was the Hobgoblin. So
yeah.
I'm glad you got that.
Is that actually a thing?
I mean, I wanted him in there.
Oh, okay, good. All right, good.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe I missed and it was actually Jonah, but no, it was.
No, Jonah is in there. Yeah. I mean, there's
great.
multiple Hobgoblins. The main Hobgoblin is the Jonah Hobgoblin. Yeah.
I mean, any book that has multiple Hobgoblins automatically gets my approval. So, that's just kind of how it goes.
And we really wanted to make it. We wanted to make them feel like a certifiable threat, not just the villain of the week that, we have to get through for this series. We wanted it to feel like hopefully they'll live on in some way down the line.
Well, nothing gets my blood boiling more than when I hear people say that Ned Leeds is the Hobgoblin. So you
Yeah.
won, yeah.
Yeah, he is at some point in some timeline.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
The core kind of theme that I kind of like latched onto in this story that I enjoyed was this. The story plays with this idea, and you've mentioned it before, that the villains are people who are kind of tired of being victims of Peter's life as Spider-Man, and have kind of decided to take back their agency, but like in a destructive way.
Right.
And I'm curious, like, not even just related to this story, but related to these stories in general, that like it is kind of a tired trope of like turning the supporting cast into villains, but not of their own agency. You know, like someone gets shoved in a tube and injected with gas and they turn into whatever, And so I like the idea here that like, oh no, actually we're tired of you ruining our lives. And that's kind of our motivation there. I'm curious if you could speak about this trope and like what, was interesting to you about it, because like I think there is something here about like how we can give these supporting cast members agency and maybe not, push them down this road. Do you have any feeling about that?
Yeah. No, I like that question. Thank you. It is a good question. I think, the cliche is like big bad villain grabs supporting cast member and turns them into new villain to face a hero against their will. And that feels it's been done before. And I think it does take the agency away from the supporting cast member. And so, one of my concerns when we did debut Gwen Goblin in one of the shorts was that it didn't have the context of why. So I made sure that there were some lines where it was clear, like, this is what she wanted. Like at the end, you realize that there was some manipulation involved. Like Madam Web obviously did manipulate her, but then she completely takes her own agency and makes a decision to take out Madam Web. So I definitely wanted these characters, Madam Web, the anime Madam Web, and Gwen Goblin, to feel like they came to this on their own. They weren't like the Jackal didn't put them into a containment unit and change their powers and make them into supervillains.
Right.
They sought this out. Like, Aunt May sought the meeting out with Norman Osborn, like, and he then allowed her to become this evil Madam Web, which that's got to be a fun story to tell at some point. Like, how did that come about? But, the real estate you have is not, I didn't have an issue to spend like giving Madam Web's origin story, but, I definitely really believe that the best villains are the ones that don't believe they're villains and they believe they are the heroes of their story, and they captured this power on their own through their own agency and power and decision making. It makes them more compelling. I think had we had more runway, maybe Gwen Goblin could have become a part of the team. Like, maybe not immediately, but there was, I could see that if we had more real estate or more issues to tell the story, that she would come back and be like one of these anti-hero type characters, because that was a real kind of radicalizing moment for her when she's like, oh, damn, like Madam Web really nudged me into this path. I didn't have the agency I thought I did. Now I'm going to have my agency and I'm going to take her out. And I thought that was a fun scene to write, even though, 4 issues is a lot, but it's also not a lot. So you have to give every character their moment and also realize that you still have this bigger story to tell.
Well, it's fun with that character, too, because we've kind of seen the agency in the opposite direction, too, which is like Spider-Gwen exists as a character that like finally has the agency to fight back in a way that Gwen couldn't. She was just dropped off a bridge and killed. But here is the kind of flip alternative to that. But then she ultimately gets her agency in the end as well, rather than just being a victim. And so that's the reason I asked the question. I thought that was an interesting choice to go with, and also is in line with what Dan Slott did. You got the character of like Karn, who starts off as an inheritor until realizing that like actually he's been duped and is being manipulated by his family and so on. So it fits in with that kind of thematic storytelling idea of the grander Spider-Verse.
Yeah, and you can tell that there's friction between Gwen Goblin and Madam Web out of the gate. Like she feels like she's done her part and she can go home and do the things she wants to do on her. The idea was let's beat the Spider Society and then we can all go back to our universes and like rule our universes. But for whatever reason, Madam Web has other ideas, and that's that tension. So that tension is seated early on, and then you see Gwen Goblin kind of resists Madam Web and kind of act on her own even before she has that realization. So I wanted to be clear that, Gwen's arc, I think, was one of the most fun to write. Just this evolution of the cliche, maniacal villain who actually has a lot of nuance and depth to her, and maybe isn't as much of a villain as we thought.
Yeah, you can't really change the heroes quite as much as the villains, so that tends to be kind of, I guess, where all the fun tends to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you also want them to be villains. They can't all be, if you make every villain a hero, you're kind of stuck.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of great villain stories have kind of fallen apart when they start to become heroes. You're like,
Right.
no, this person really should not be redeemed.
Yeah, it's okay that they're bad.
In this way. Yeah, let some people be bad. My favorite Disney villains are the ones that are just evil. They get their really they get their turn at the axe. If you will.
Yeah, because their evil is what they believe to be good. So
yeah. Or you just want to hunt apes, and that's kind of your thing. Yeah. But okay, so it wouldn't be like a Marvel story or a serialized comic storytelling if it didn't end with the Spider-Verse will return. Is there something next that's being planned? Can you speak about that at all? Are you involved with that, or is that just of course the Spider-Verse will continue?
Yeah, I can't say anything about it. I'm excited for what's next.
Okay, cool. And it's not the Spider-Verse versus Venom-verse? Is it there's something else? Okay, fair enough. I for those listening at home, well, that was a shrug. So
yeah, sorry.
we'll leave it there. Okay, great. Well, I really enjoyed the Spider Society.
Thanks,
and I got a lot out of it, and really just saw that you were having fun.
It was a blast.
I wanted to talk
really fun.
If you have time still.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you kind of about this sea change for Spider-Man, going from I guess what you and I grew up with, Peter Parker, I imagine we started reading around the same time, late 80s, early 90s.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Yeah. Which was still very limited in what the book was about. Yes, he was married and, there was symbiotes and things like that, but it still had kind of, I think, adhered to kind of more Ditkoian Romita formula. And
yeah, the symbiote stuff didn't really kick. I mean, Carnage was kind of the tipping point, I would say. That's when you start to see Maximum Carnage is when you start seeing a bunch of the other symbiotes. But yeah, we were still early days.
For sure. Perhaps you can elaborate on this for people who don't know, but you were born in Florida to parents who were exiled from Cuba, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know the importance that Spider-Man plays in your life. Even before you were writing these things, I know you had your own Spider-Man podcast and have been blogging about Spider-Man, and which I love those blogs.
Oh, thanks.
I'm curious about what it was that connected young Alex, specifically to Peter Parker. Now we're in the era of kind of Spider-Man is everyone, or anyone can wear the mask, but Peter was of a very culturally specific thing. What about that really spoke to you?
Yeah, my first Spider-Man comic was, and I'm sure we've discussed this, was a reprint, a digest reprint, which was very much the same size as the Archie digests that are still coming out, but were coming. That was my intro to comics, period. And I got it at a grocery store, and it was a reprint of Spider-Man, the Spectacular Spider-Man #2, not the ongoing, but the magazine series that ran kind of parallel to the Romita Lee stuff. In the 60s, and it is probably one of the best Green Goblin stories ever told.
It's got that crazy psychedelic Romita art in it, yeah.
Yeah, and that opening scene where, George Stacy is giving the presentation on the Green Goblin, and Norman Osborn is having the cold sweats, realizing he is the Green Goblin, and that sense of dread, knowing that, as a reader, you know that Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin again, but Peter Parker has no idea. And so I'm 5 or 6 when I read this, so I have no real sense of the history or the nuance of it, but it really pulled me in. So to answer your question about Peter Parker, he was the underdog. He was the nerd. I spent a lot of time with my maternal grandparents as a kid, and I was a pretty shy, bookish kid in elementary school and middle school and beyond. So I could connect to Peter Parker in those levels. I could really relate to him. And just that sense of being an outcast and an outsider, but also wanting to do the right thing. And I think those are really tenets of Peter Parker. And also the difference between historically Spider-Man is what if the sidekick became the hero? Like Peter Parker was a teenage character. Like he wasn't like this established adult man or woman who was confident and wielded the power that they've been honing for years. Like, Batman's an adult. He's a billionaire. Superman is an alien from Krypton. Wonder Woman was born on this mythical island. And obviously, that's a testament to Stan Lee and his collaborators Kirby, Ditko, Buscema, and so on, who were able to humanize these heroes in a way that they hadn't before. But I could relate to Spider-Man particularly because of that kind of outsider, just a regular guy, or regular like kind of bookish kid who has strong ties to his family, but also is struggling socially. And that was really what I connected with. I think by the time Romita started drawing the characters, I will say, like, everyone looked beautiful. And that's just because Romita draws beautiful people. Like, that was almost the archification of that era of Spider-Man. Like, Mary Jane and Gwen could be kind of seen like the Betty and Veronica to Peter's Archie, that love triangle, but everyone was stunning. But then so after that initial introduction, I went back and read the Ditko stuff, and that's where the big connection happened. But in terms of the modern Spider-Man stuff I was reading, I picked my first Spider-Man comic that I picked up off the newsstand was Amazing 348, which was an Eric Larson issue where the Avengers guest star, and I was like, Sandman, he's an Avenger, and I was immediately hooked into Eric Larson's art, and that ramp up to 350 with that great Doctor Doom battle was classic to me, and then Eric left immediately after, but Bagley was no slouch, so that was a fun era of Spider-Man to really kind of be buying it as it came out. And at the same time, you have J.M. DeMatteis is doing classic stuff with Sal Buscema on Spectacular, and Alex Saviuk was the stalwart of Web of Spider-Man. So I think it was very singular, like Peter is Spider-Man, and I think maybe the first reverberations saying the opposite was the Clone Saga, where you start playing with clones and dual Spider-Mans and Ben Reilly and alternate Spider-Mans. And I think there's probably a think piece to be written about how the Clone Saga maybe teed up the Spider-Verse stuff, but I don't have the time to do that.
I'm sure I'll be writing about it sometime in the future. But I guess the reason I ask is like I feel like we're in the middle of like a sea change about like who and what Spider-Man is, and the Spider-Verse kind of like finds itself as the kind of change agent. I think Bendis kind of introduced the idea of Miles, and then Dan Slott introduced the kind of like the delivery mechanism for that, which is like, hey, there's another spider person. Well, hey, there's a way for there to be an infinite number of spider people. And I think the movies are kind of leading this charge on like solidifying the statement of like anyone can wear the mask, right? And I think they prove it, with Into the Spider-Verse. And then Across the Spider-Verse asks, what does it mean to wear the mask? And everybody has a different answer. I mean, most of the spider people say it's about sacrifice, and these are the stories that have to happen in order for you to be Spider-Man. And Miles obviously pushes back on that in the movies. And I don't feel like the comics are quite as introspective about the legacy of Spider-Man and like what it means to be Spider-Man once Spider-Verse was introduced. For example, like you have the character of like Spider Hunter, who is like Kraven the Hunter in like a Spider-Man costume, and I guess he's kind of as evil as Kraven, and although maybe he's even less virtuous given that he stabs people in the back, which I feel like maybe Kraven the Hunter might not do, given
I don't think he
has like
would.
a
So,
rigorous code. But he's Spider-Man nevertheless. Like he's considered a part of the Spider Totem.
Right.
So I guess the question I have for you is like, and this could go for the comics or anything else, but like, what do you see as the unifying connection between these heroes and villains? Like, what makes them Spider-Man? Is it just the costume? Is it like we can have villainous spider people? They're still Spider-Man, but like, what is the thing that you think connects them? Now that we've accepted this idea that there are almost an infinite number of spider people.
Yeah, and I don't think, this concept negates what we talked about before, i.e. what makes Peter special. I think both things can exist at once because you're looking at things in different ways. Like Spider-Verse is a very macro, multi-universal concept, whereas Peter Parker as Spider-Man is a very specific 616 centric perspective. Like he is the Spider-Man of his universe, and sure, there's alternate versions or evil versions or clones, but this is his space. And I think all of these characters, including Miguel and Aranya, and even it's kind of similar to Batman in terms of like his sidekicks and friends and like Nightwing and characters that honor him and take on their mantles to pay respect, but in a much bigger way and a much more less literal way. Like these are people that just are the spider people of their universe without knowledge of the bigger Spider-Verse. So I think the core thing that they all have is that they are willing to overcome great odds in the name of heroism or what they perceive to be, their mandate. Which I think is very essential to being a spider hero. I mean, Ghost Spider is the Spider Man or Spider Person of her universe. Like she replaces Peter because Peter isn't there to do that. And so I think the core thing is it echoes what makes Peter Parker essential. This idea that no matter the odds, no matter what's stacked against you, whether it's personal or a supervillain, you will push through it to do the right thing. As you see it, because there are some villains involved. So it's what they see as right. 90% of the time, it is a heroic choice.
Yeah, I guess I ask it because, like, I think about like the Edge of Spider-Verse, and we could do that series forever, and like if I were to continue that story, like let's say that was an ongoing, right? Like for the kind of title of Spider-Man to retain any meaning, there would have to be some commonalities between those stories, right? Other than just, I would hope, other than just that they maybe have like Romita eyes and a spider emblem on their chest.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the characters, when they work, really evoke the core tenets of what made Peter Parker compelling at the beginning and still compelling to this day. This guy who's trying to do his best, who is juggling so much personally and superhero, quote unquote, professionally, that it's making it hard for him to live a normal life because he's taken on this great responsibility. And it gets down to, with great power comes great responsibility. Like that's the thing that all of them have to evoke to really kind of cut through the noise and be successful. And I think that's one of the big things about Spider Society too, is like how do each of these characters reflect that? Like what is the weight that they're bearing and how do they succeed? So yeah, it all goes back to that original appearance.
Yeah, I mean, I ask because it's an interesting question I ask myself all the time when I'm reading these things and thinking about the character, because like we've got Beyond the Spider-Verse coming out, and like no part of me thinks that movie ends with Miles being wrong, right? Like you have to let your uncle die in order to be Spider-Man, right?
Yeah,
like that would be a very dark and weird thing. But then when you start, if he breaks that, and ultimately the reality is, well, there's no forced destiny or commonality between these characters. The next question is, well, okay, like what is the true commonality between these characters? If it's not sacrifice or letting your uncle die when they become a captain, or whatever, or your, or your father die when they become a captain, like, what is the new shared thing? And it seems like your answer is someone who continues fighting despite great odds.
Yeah, and I think that's the movie. Like, how do you answer that question? That's the core of whatever that movie is going to be. Unless, it's not going to be, I don't think they're going to say, Miles, you have to let your uncle die. Like, I think that would be a very dark and weird choice. But I think that's why we're all anticipating the movie in some ways. We want to see how that question is answered. And I think they've done a great job with the first two. So I'm eager to see what's next.
Yeah, me too. It's just a question that like lingers out there because like it could redefine Spider-Man as we know it, like especially now that we've entered this era. So I think it's something interesting. So on that note, and the question I think I've asked you before in regards to like writing your book, but now that you've really contributed to the comics in a sizable way, like what does it mean to you personally that you have like now entered a chapter into the Spider-Man mythos that you grew up reading on the comic book page?
I mean, it's the coolest thing ever that I've written a lot of cool stories. I've gotten to write my own characters, create my own characters, but Spider-Man was always my guy. That was the book that I think, aside from a brief departure during the Clone Saga, during that, I think it was right after they revealed Ben Reilly was the real Peter Parker, I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna take a break. But even then, I quickly came back because I was intrigued by what they were going to do, and so it was the book that I always stuck to, the character I always stuck with. And I mean, I read, I was talking to Keith DeCandido about this because he contributed and edited that anthology, that prose anthology, Ultimate Spider-Man, that came out in the '90s, and I remember reading that as a kid and just kind of dreaming about doing stuff like that, not just writing prose, but writing Spider-Man stories. And I would write my own little Spider-Man stories or like come up with new villains and new characters. So being able to canonically contribute to the comics and at the same time elevate characters that I feel really strongly deserve a bigger spotlight, like Aranya, Miguel, Webweaver, characters that I love and that I think are really additive to the mythos, was a huge honor. And to do it with someone like Scott, who's a great artist and like brought this energy to the book, that I was just so lucky to collaborate with him and the entire team. Matt Milla did some great colors. It was just a really fantastic lineup. Joe Carmagna on letters, and Nick and Caden and the Spider Office. Like, it just felt like a real team effort to make this sing. I always treat these things like they're fleeting, like maybe this will be it and I'll never get another shot. And I had my shot and it was fun. And I feel like I added to the story, to this big, epic, unfurling saga. And so I'm really proud of it.
So now that you've written Star Wars comics and Spider-Man comics, Sophie's Choice, which is a bigger deal to 6-year-old Alex.
Oh man, that's tough.
Is Star Wars not quite there yet because it's not the movies?
I don't think 6-year-old me has gotten into Star Wars yet. I think I am aware of it. Like, I had seen Return of the Jedi as a kid, came out in '83, so I must have seen it on video. But obviously the visage of Darth Vader was terrifying to a young me. But Spider-Man was my guy, so it was like, yeah, I think that would be it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
Always a pleasure.
Great conversation. If people want to follow you online, what books have you got coming out? I know you've got doing a lot of stuff, so plug.
I'm at alexsegura.com. That's my website. You can also sign up for my newsletter, Substack, alexsegura.substack.com. That's where I update people on everything that's going on. The Question All Along the Watchtower, the first issue of my Question miniseries, launches later this month, November 20th, with art by Kian Torme. And it's Renee Montoya investigating a crime on the Justice League Watchtower. I'm writing Star Wars Battle of Jakku, which is a 12-issue series split up into 3 miniseries. So the first 4 have come out, and now we're launching the second miniseries, Republic Under Siege. With art by Stefano Raphael, who is just super talented. Leonard Kirk did the first one with some help from Luke Ross and Jethro Morales. Stefano does the second arc, and then Jethro does the third arc with some help from Leonard Kirk. And so it's really, just buy it for the art alone, but the story really chronicles a lost chapter of Star Wars lore. Alter Ego, the sequel to my LA Times Book Prize winning crime novel Secret Identity, hits in December. So does Nightmares and Sueños. And yeah, I'm still plugging away at Dick Tracy, and there's some other stuff. I have a Daredevil novel coming out next year that we just debuted the cover on that I'm actively, feverishly working on right now.
Do you just live on book tours?
Yeah, I mean, this is it. This is all I'm doing. I definitely need to take a little break.
It's like your rock star phase, Alex.
I'm excited. I've never actually been on a full book tour, and I will be at the end of this year for Alter Ego. So that'll be. Oh, and Lynx, the legendary Lynx, which collects the comic book pages from Secret Identity and expands and colors them. And we're treating it like a lost comic book that we're finally reprinting. Spiderheads will appreciate. J.M. DeMatteis wrote the intro to the Lynx, and he did it very, very tongue-in-cheek. Basically talked about how much the Lynx influenced him as a writer while working on Kraven's Last Hunt and things like that. So that was like, that would be 12-year-old me would have totally been blown away by that. And DeMatteis is one of my writing heroes and just one of the nicest guys in comics. So that was cool.
How is that being released? Is a comic book publisher releasing that?
Yeah, Mad Cave is putting it out as a trade paperback.
Oh, fascinating. Well, that's super cool. Well, we can't wait to check all that out. And thank you again, Alex, for coming on the show.
Always a treat. I'm a fan, so it's cool to be here.
Thanks again to Alex Segura for coming back on The Amazing Spider Talk. If you haven't yet checked out Spider Society, please order the trade paperback or check it out in individual issues at your comic shop or on Marvel Unlimited. Also, a thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk. This podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these interviews as soon as we record them, our single-issue reviews, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Thank you to everybody who already supports us and the work that we do. If you value smart comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope that you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on the show is admittedly niche, but we feel that we offer valuable commentary and model fair methods of criticism for a character and medium that rarely receive the kind of consideration we believe they deserve. So please, if what we do is valuable to you, we can only continue doing it with your support on Patreon. So, until I learn that a twisted version of my aunt is trying to bring an end to the multiverse, our motto will always remain, with great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.